So when we work with fascial unwinding, we generally start by preceding it with some articulation. Articulation is not specifically a Cranio-Sacral technique, it's something used by all sorts of physical therapists, osteopaths, chiropractors, physiotherapists, massage therapists. It's just moving things around, particularly moving joints. And it's useful as a precursor to fascial unwinding because it loosens up the body, makes the body more amenable to the fascial unwinding, and therefore it enables the fascial unwinding to engage that much more quickly and readily. So we're working with the arm today, and so I'm going to start by articulating the arm a little bit. And Zoe, you don't need to help me at all, just leave it to me. And Zoe is very relaxed and at ease, floppy, just lets her arm, leaves her arm to me completely. You'll find with a lot of patients it's not that simple. You know, you lift up their arm and they're straight away trying to help you, or you lift up their arm and it's difficult to lift it up. So you have to adapt to each person in order to find what level of articulation is going to work most easily. So you can start, I'm just going to start that again. So I'm going to run my fingers under the wrist to gently lift the forearm up, and just check that the forearm is moving freely at the elbow, and then we can include the upper arm. Make sure you don't help at all, Zoe. It's very difficult not to. And gradually increasing the range of movement within whatever is comfortable for the patient. Obviously some patients would not be able to move to this degree, and you don't force anything. The whole process is gentle. The purpose is to relax the patient and help everything to let go rather than to force anything. But note in particular that movement of bringing the upper arm right up by the face. That's when articulation is going to be most useful, is when you explore the full range of movement and actually stretch the boundaries a little bit. It's not going to be useful if you're just kind of wobbling the arm around here for several minutes. That's not going to do anything. So it doesn't have to take a long time. It can just be a few seconds, half a minute, but you do want to make it loose, floppy, and exploring the full range of motion. Okay, so that's the articulation. Now we can move on to the actual unwinding. Before you start the unwinding, as a practitioner, you want to make sure that you are in a suitably grounded state, establish your own fulcrums, and then again, just slide your fingers under the wrist to gently lift the forearm up, making sure everything feels loose. And then these fingers are going to slide under the upper arm, just above the elbow. So I can just take the arm slightly off the couch. So it's essentially hanging there in mid-air, simply supported by my very light touch. And notice right from the start that I'm not gripping the wrist, it's just resting lightly on my fingers. And gradually I'm lightening that contact more and more to the point where gravity is beginning to let the arm drop. And as it does so, the arm naturally starts to unwind. So I'm not doing anything other than softening my contact. Any other movements are coming spontaneously from the arm, whatever way it wants to go. So as you can see, my contact is so light I barely need to be there. A certain amount of support is of course necessary, although you will find that arms can just take on a life of their own, to the point where you don't need to be there at all. And each arm will be different. Some arms move very freely, some will be quite slow. And as you can see, you need to adapt your own body movements according to what's happening. You can't just stand in one place, because you've got to keep track of the arm and go with it wherever it wants to go. And your hand positions can of course vary. And again, you can see how little I need to be involved, how the arm just tends to take on a life of its own. And of course, from an external point of view, you might easily assume that I must be moving the arm, because how else would it move? Or that the patient must be moving the arm. Particularly when you do unwinding yourself, you will soon find that the body does just move for itself. And that is part of its cybernetic system. Its automatic regulatory system. So once again, I'm not dictating any of these movements. Now it's found a point at which it wants to rest. There's some little wobbling movements going on, which may or may not be visible, particularly arising from the shoulder. And unwinding, as you can see, involves movement, but the movement is really all just working towards the points of stillness. It's the points of stillness which are the crucial element, as with any craniosacral therapy. And there you can see that we've reached a point that is significant. The body is responding. There's little shaking movements, wobbling movements. This is indicative of the fact that this is a key point, a point which we could never have discovered of our own accord. Only the body can find these points. Not every still point will involve these twitches, but if that is happening, that's something to stay with, a good indication that you're in the right place. And you may be able to see that the whole body is involved to some extent. Head, the neck, the trunk, the other shoulder. So you can see there are various stages involved. We have the articulation stage, we have the engagement, and then the arm moving around fairly freely all over the place, and then the most significant stage where it finds the fulcrum, finds the points of stillness, the points of balanced tension. And for the most part, you're just allowing the process to happen. But at these points of stillness, there is also a need to just help the body to stay at those points. The body in its wisdom knows where it needs to go and it finds its way there, but also in its wisdom it sometimes wants to avoid those key points, either because they are touching on some old emotional memory or some physical injury which the body wants to deal with, but at the same time may have a bit of reluctance to address. And other parts of the body may get involved. You can see the head and neck getting involved here, and that's fine. You don't need to concern yourself with them. You don't need to hold the head as well. Sometimes the legs or the whole body can get involved, and that's okay. You can just let it do what it wants to do. So now we have an engagement right down through this arm and shoulder and trunk, down through the across to the right side of the body. And this again is the point where you need to just help the body to stay with it rather than run away from it. The fact that I'm leaning back doesn't indicate that I'm pulling strongly on this arm, and again I'm still barely holding it. Just enough to keep it in focus. I was going to say we could come to an end there, but I don't think Zoe wants to come to an end, so I think we're going to be going on for a while. When I say Zoe, I mean her fascia. And again, just to emphasize how light my touch is, I really hardly need to be here. And the process will just continue of its own accord. Again, to emphasize that whilst movement is a significant part of the fascial winding process, it's the points of stillness, the times when it comes into focus, that are the most significant. So when it goes still, you don't want to be thinking, nothing's happening, I better stop, or I better do something else. On the contrary, these are exactly the points where you need to stay with it, and sometimes that can last a very long time. And that's what will make the fascial unwinding most profound and most significant, rather than just a superficial, relaxing process. while that process continues, I just want to mention a few technical points that may not have arisen in that particular example. When you do this for yourself, when you want to initiate an unwinding process in a patient, as we've seen, the first thing is the articulation. And if somebody is very stiff and tense, you might want to do a lot more articulation than was necessary here. And then, as I mentioned, taking up the contact very lightly. You want to do everything possible to help the patient be as relaxed and comfortable as they can be. And when you first take up that contact, you have a contact under the wrist and a contact under the upper arm. As you saw with Zoe, it will then start to unwind, or at least in principle it will. But when you do this for yourself this afternoon, you may take up that contact, take up the contact on the arm and hold the arm, and wait, and wait, and wait, and nothing may happen. The main reason why that is likely to happen is because you yourself are not sufficiently relaxed and fluent enough. You need to be very loose and fluent and fluidic in order to enable the unwinding process to happen. And most practitioners, or most student practitioners, most beginners, are not going to be relaxed enough and soft enough in themselves. So that's always the first thing to look at. A second point to consider is whether the patient is letting go sufficiently. Hopefully with the articulation you've done and whatever other encouragement you may need to do, inviting them to take a breath, to let go, to let themselves be floppy and everything, that will help. But with many everyday patients, they just don't know how to let go and relax, so you need to spend time helping them to do that. That's the second point to address. And then, even when you are very loose and soft and fluent in yourself, you're probably just in the way. Your contacts are still too firm, too supportive, and you need to just gently take your hands away and away and away to the point where you're barely touching or even not touching the arm anymore. Only then can the arm begin to drop and begin to unwind. And then the tendency is to think, oh, it's moving, I better kind of take hold of it again. But on the contrary, you want to get out of the way even more. The secret of fascial unwinding is getting yourself out of the way as much as possible. So you just need to keep loosening, softening, getting out of the way, lightening your contact. Give it the freedom to move. And then the forearm can start to move, and then you're probably still supporting too much with the upper arm, so you need to let that soften. And so you can gradually allow more freedom to the arm to start to move. Then, as it does start to move, the next thing you need to look at is how to manage your own body. As I mentioned, you need to move in order to stay with the arm. If you're standing in one place and the arm is unwinding over there, you're eventually going to get to a point where you fall over, so that's no good. So before that happens, you need to anticipate, you need to move step by step, gradually, wherever the arm is taking you, so that you can be there ready for it. And again, that has to be done in a very fluidic way, not jolting, not interrupting the unwinding process. Once you interrupt it, the body will tend to sort of tighten up and need to start again. So everything needs to be fluent and fluidic. So that way you can go with it, allow the whole process to happen. It may take you all over the place, it may move a lot, it may move a little. And then, as I said, the key points are the still points. You can't make a still point happen, you have to let the body find its own way there. So you let the body go, allowing, the basic principle is allowing it to go wherever it wants to go. But eventually it will find those points of stillness. And at those points you need to acknowledge them for what they are, not think it's stuck, it's stopped, I have to do something else, I might as well give up. But on the contrary, recognize that is a key point. And you can identify those points not only because it's got still, or gone still, but because of the quality of the engagement at that point, you will feel that it begins to vibrate or shake, or something intensifies that tells you this is a significant moment. And of course there are times when you get to a point that feels still where it's not actually a still point. I mean, it could be that if the arm is going down towards the floor a bit, eventually it comes up against the couch and can't go any further. You could be thinking, oh, this is a really good still point, it's gone really still here, and all that's happened is it's just stuck against the couch. Or sometimes if you're holding the arm and you're kind of, it's unwinding and unwinding and unwinding, and then it gets to a point where it goes still, you think, oh, this feels like a really good still point, and actually you're just holding the shirt and the shirt can't stretch any further, and your shirts don't unwind that effectively, so you have to be careful of things like that. But as I say, you can recognize that true still point not only by the stillness, but by the quality of engagement, the quality of the sense of something about to happen, the vibrancy of it. And then finally you come to the point of bringing it to an end. Most unwinding processes will come to a natural end of their own accord, and the arm will often unwind its way back to the abdomen, and you just let it rest there and let it come to an end. Sometimes it doesn't seem to want to do that, in which case you can gently inform it mentally to say, okay, it's time to let this come to an end, and that in itself will help. You can start to follow the movements that draw you back towards the abdomen and not follow it when it tries to go elsewhere. And generally that will be enough. On the whole, you don't want to just suddenly think, I've had enough of this, and dump the arm back down on my patient. You want to let it all come to some kind of fluent conclusion. But as I say, mostly that will happen spontaneously. Sometimes you just need to ask the patient to help you to bring things to an end. So, Zoe, how are you feeling?
Good. Yeah, it's good. I could feel like my whole body wanted to sort of be part of it. You know, like it started off very much, obviously just this one side, and it took me a little while, I felt, to sort of really relax and let go. But then once I did, I could feel like, everything starting to sort of respond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was nice. It was good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did it bring up anything familiar? Did you recognize the things that were happening?
Yeah, I recognized a lot of what I felt before, like a deep thoracic twist going on. I've got a lot of tension on my right hand side, and I can feel always that wanting to come in and be part of it, and sort of like a lot of tightness wanting to release, and I think that's why my right side always wants to join in. But I could feel just that spiraling feeling, starting with the arm, but then starting to go through the body. Yeah.
And do you particularly relate that to any physical injuries you had, or physical patterns?
Yeah. I had a dislocated shoulder on my right hand side. I've had some surgery on my right hand side, so I've got a little scar tissue. So I know that my right hand side is probably tight fascially anyway. So, and I can feel like thoracic tightness. I get a lot of thoracic pain, so I can start to feel that sort of mid-thoracic area wanting to twist and turn and take part. Yeah. Incidentally,
Zoe's mentioning that it's the right-hand side that is significant for her. 2 points there. I was working on the left side, not simply for demonstration purposes, happened to be convenient, rather than having chosen an appropriate side, but also it shows that wherever you engage, you're going to engage with whatever patterns are there in the body, so it doesn't ultimately matter where you engage, although you will normally, of course, work on a side that is relevant. And did you feel any emotional connections at all?
Just an intenseness. I think that's more than anything. I nothing sort of came to mind or anything, but just a feeling of something deep, sort of holding tense, as if it's in there, and everything's coming from here really, somewhere. Yeah, so sort of a tightness. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'd like to show you one more thing. As I mentioned, the main issue that gets in the way when you're first beginning to do fascial unwinding is the practitioner's own tension blocking the system. or particularly the practitioner, holding on too firmly. And you'll think you're being infinitely light and as light as you can possibly be, and you need to be 1,000,000 times lighter than that. So that's something you need to get used to. And when you start with just holding the arm up like that, immediately you feel you have to support the arm and you're holding it up, and it's difficult for you to be as soft and fluent as you could be. So a way around that, of starting off an unwinding process, is to only take on the forearm initially, which makes less demanding for you, easier to just support the forearm. And then as the forearm unwinds, that tends to then naturally engage the upper arm, and the whole process can evolve from that. So I just want to show you how you would do that. Again, assuming you've done the articulation first of all, you can even do a little bit more articulation, just check that everything's nice and loose and floppy. And you can still have your hand under the upper arm, but not lifting off the couch at all. And as you can see, I'm sitting for this, but I've got my chair well back, because at some point this arm is going to take off, and I need to be ready to just go with it when the time comes. So, having done the articulation, having settled your own fulcrums, keeping the upper arm still supported on the couch, you can bring the forearm up to 90 degrees, so perpendicular, and then in the same way as before, lightening your contacts so that the fingers under the wrist are getting softer and softer and softer. And as you can see, that allows the forearm to start to drop. You don't want it to drop too quickly. In fact, just to demonstrate a point, if you let it go too quickly, obviously it's just fallen down on the couch and that's the end of it, that's no good. On the other hand, you don't want to be gripping it so strongly that it can't move at all. So you want a very gradual process of just allowing it to drop bit by bit. And that's what enables the fascia to start engaging, or the system to start engaging. And as well as the gravitational pull, gradually pulling it down towards the couch, you begin to feel other things happening. Little twists and turns, little tightenings, both in the forearm and in the upper arm. And this, of course, is much easier because you only have to think about the forearm. You don't have the effort of supporting the upper arm. And yet the upper arm is already getting involved, even though it's still on the couch. I can feel little twitchings and wrigglings going on in the upper arm. And then it gets to the point where the upper arm is ready to come off the couch. So now it's come off the couch pretty much of its own, but with a little bit of support from me. And then it gets to the point where it's no longer practical for me to be sitting, so I have to stand up without disturbing the process. And once again, see how little you need to be involved. Just one finger is enough to support that arm, and even that's not really necessary. So Zoe, I'd love to go off on another unwinding with you, but I think for demonstration purposes we'll just leave it at that. Okay, anything else you have to say about the whole process?
It just feels like you really supporting me, so I'm surprised when you say it's just one finger, because it feels like so much more, but I know I'm relaxed. So it's that strange feeling between, I know I'm relaxed, but I'd imagine being relaxed that my arm would just flop. But I feel like you're there, but you're obviously only there with one finger.
Yes, not all the time with one finger. There were times when it needed more support, but again, this is the vital point that obviously, generally, if you let your arm relax, it will just flop, unless somebody else is moving it. And this is where engagement is crucial. If you're not engaged with the fascia, it'll flop. But it's when you engage, it's when you feel that sense of something beginning to happen. Engagement, rather like when you engage a clutch in a car. You can press on an accelerator as much as you like, it'll make a lot of noise, but the car won't go anywhere if you're not engaged. If you bring the clutch up too quickly, the car stalls and you don't go anywhere. But it's when you find just that right balance of bringing the clutch up and the accelerator down, you begin to feel right, the engine's really starting to move, then you're engaged. And that's what you feel in the fascia. You can move the arm around, you can articulate it, the person can move their own arm around, but it's when you just allow that subtle process of allowing it to drop and then beginning to engage and feeling those little twists and turns starting, that's when something meaningful begins to happen. That's when you get a more profound process happening. And yes, people will often say, well, again, as you start, you'll probably think, those of you lying down will think, the practitioner must be moving my arm. The practitioner will be saying, well, no, I'm not doing it, you must be moving your arm. And you both think the other person's doing it, but of course neither of you is doing it. Once you engage with the fascia has a mind of its own. Well, not exactly a mind, but it has an initiative of its own to start unwinding. So yeah. And were there any times when you were aware that I wasn't really supporting you, but you were still moving?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, especially this side. It was off on its own dance, and you weren't there. So I knew you were here on my left, but I felt you almost released me, and then I was off.
Yeah.
On my own. Yeah.
Yes, particularly towards the latter stages when I was actually standing back and just leaving you to get on with it. Yeah.
But you still feel supported, even though you're in that middle of thinking, is this really happening, or am I relaxed? Am I doing this? You're sort of questioning in your head, but your body's just kind of doing it, and you just have to sort of stay relaxed with that and let it go. Yeah.
Yes, and looking at those latter stages, you might think, well, why do we need a practitioner? Why can't I just lie down and do it for myself? But again, it's that matter of engagement, of enabling that process to happen. It's when you've done a lot of fascial unwinding, you can to some extent do it for yourself, but it's still not the same as when you have a practitioner. And particularly for most people who aren't familiar with fascial unwinding, it won't generally happen without that initial connection. Okay.